There is a kind of pain that does not show up on X-rays. It doesn't swell or bruise. It lingers quietly, sometimes in the small of your back, sometimes as a weight in your chest, sometimes in the tired way your legs carry you through the day. Carter, a 74-year-old man from a sleepy corner of Ohio, knows that kind of pain too well. He's been to the doctor more times than he can count. He's had his back scanned, his blood drawn, his joints examined by the best specialists in town. Each time he hears the same phrase, "There's nothing wrong, sir. It must just be part of aging." But Carter doesn't believe that anymore. He says the pain arrives at night, when the house is still, when the old photographs on the mantel seem to whisper stories he'd rather forget. That familiar ache starts in his spine and settles behind his heart. Not sharp, not unbearable, but heavy, like something unfinished. He remembers raising his voice too often, choosing pride over closeness, burying grief instead of holding it. And as the years pass, he wonders, what if this pain isn't something to fix, but something to understand? In the teachings of the Buddha, there is a quiet yet profound truth, that the body is not merely a machine made of muscles and bones, but a mirror, a map, and sometimes a messenger of your karma. Karma here does not mean punishment or fate, but the subtle residue of choices made, of emotions held, words spoken or withheld, intentions formed in moments of clarity or confusion. We often assume that illness and discomfort belong solely to the body, the domain of medicine, of diet, of aging. But perhaps some of what we carry is not just physical. Perhaps your fatigue isn't only from poor sleep, but from years of self-neglect. Perhaps the lump in your throat is not just acid reflux, but truth left unspoken. Perhaps your restless legs remember every time you ran from what needed to be faced. And though some may scoff at the thought, believing that karma is too abstract, too mythical to have any real bearing on back pain or blood pressure, even modern science now points toward the undeniable connection between mind, emotion, and the body. Trauma has memory. Stress changes biology. Our bodies listen more closely than we realize. They keep records of what the mind tries to forget. So today on Quiet Wisdom, we won't be offering another medical solution or asking you to deny what your doctor says. Instead, we offer something deeper, a new way of seeing your body, not as something broken or betraying you, but as something sacred, speaking to you in symbols, aches, and signals. What if that recurring pain isn't random? What if it's an invitation to listen, to pause, to reflect on an inner imbalance that your soul has long been whispering through your skin, your breath, your bones? Today we begin a journey, not into anatomy, but into awareness. Because when you learn to read the language of your body through the lens of karma, what once felt like suffering may begin to feel like guidance, and what once felt like limitation may slowly become liberation. 1. The head. When thought becomes a cage, there's a certain kind of suffering that doesn't scream. It hums. It hides behind polite smiles, behind careful routines and long silences. It lives quietly inside the mind, disguised as thinking. For Margaret, a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher from Maine, it began with small things, forgetting where she placed her glasses, struggling to recall a word mid-sentence, feeling a fog settle in her mind by late afternoon. At first she brushed it off as fatigue, but over time the headaches came, not the kind that throb with sharp pain, but the dull, persistent ones that made everything feel heavier, slower, dimmer. Doctors ruled out all the big things. Her scans were clear. Her blood work was fine. And yet, Margaret still felt trapped, not in her body, but in her thoughts. She found herself replaying past regrets on an endless loop. The years she worked too much, the conversations she never had, the apology she never gave her late husband. She once said, "It's like my mind won't stop running, but it never gets anywhere. Just circles and circles and circles." In Buddhist teachings, the head is often associated with the ego, the part of us that clings to control, to identity, to being right. The mind, when left unchecked, becomes a restless wanderer. As the Buddha said, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. When our thoughts are driven by fear, guilt, or pride, they leave residue, not just in the heart, but in the body. Chronic tension in the forehead, migraines, dizziness, and mental fog may be signs that our inner world is carrying too many unprocessed burdens. Spiritually, this kind of suffering can be the karmic imprint of using knowledge to control rather than to uplift. It may arise from past tendencies to speak with arrogance, to outsmart rather than to understand, to rely solely on intellect while neglecting the quiet voice of intuition. And so healing begins not by trying to silence the mind, but by softening it, by listening to it with compassion rather than judgment. For Margaret, that shift came during a walk in her garden. She began each morning by placing one hand gently on her forehead, closing her eyes, and whispering a simple mantra, "I see you, mind. Thank you. Now rest." She started journaling, not to analyze, but to release. And slowly, the fog began to lift, not all at once, but in tender layers, like clouds moving gently across the sky. In Buddhism, the balance between intellect and wisdom is sacred. Wisdom isn't just knowing, it's knowing when to let go. As Thich Nhat Hanh Toms you beautifully said, "Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor." For those in their later years, the mind can feel like both a gift and a trap. But when we step back, breathe, and simply observe its patterns without clinging, the cage begins to dissolve. And in that quiet space, what emerges is not confusion, but clarity. Not fear, but presence. 2. The throat. The karma of unspoken truth. There's a peculiar tightness some people feel in the throat. Not the scratchiness of a cold or the fatigue after too much speaking, but something deeper, a kind of weight. As if words were trapped just below the surface, pressing gently but persistently, asking to be heard. Eleanor, a 71-year-old widow from Oregon, knew that sensation well. Her voice had always been soft, not weak, just careful. All her life she had been the peacemaker, the one who chose silence over confrontation, even when her husband made decisions she disagreed with, even when her daughter drifted away and the distance grew unbearable. She swallowed her sorrow, her frustration, her truth, again and again, until it hardened into something physical. She began losing her voice frequently. A persistent tickle haunted her throat. Some days, she could barely get through a phone call without coughing. Doctors gave her lozenges, told her to drink more water, but no one asked her what she hadn't said. In Buddhist teachings, the throat is considered the center of truth, expression, and clarity. When energy stagnates here, it may be the echo of a lifetime, or many lifetimes, of silencing one's authentic voice, whether through fear, obligation, or habit. When truth is withheld, it doesn't vanish. It waits, and over time, it may manifest as chronic tension, inflammation, thyroid imbalance, or even loss of speech. This is not about speaking loudly or carelessly. No, it's about speaking honestly, about aligning the inner truth with the outer voice. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes, Peace means saying what has long been left unsaid. For Eleanor, healing began in an unlikely place, a meditation group at her local community center. There, in a circle of elders just like her, each carrying unspoken stories, she was invited to chant, softly at first, just one syllable, Om. The vibration startled her, not because it was loud, but because it felt true, like the voice of a younger version of herself she had long forgotten. She began journaling letters she never intended to send, to her daughter, to her late husband, even to herself. With each word, her throat loosened, not magically, but meaningfully. She cried often, not because she was weak, but because the dam had finally cracked open. Spiritually, the karma of the throat is often tied to past misuse of speech, gossip, deceit, manipulation, or its opposite, choosing silence when speech could have healed. Whether from lifetimes ago or this one, the result is the same: a disruption in the flow of honest, compassionate communication. And so the remedy is not just to speak more, but to speak from the heart, to allow one's voice, however shaky, to echo one's truth. As Thich Nhat taught, speak with kindness, listen with compassion. For those in their later years, there may be many truths left behind in the rush of life, but it's never too late to speak them in prayer, in conversation, in writing, even in silent tears. Because sometimes, what heals the throat isn't sound, but sincerity. 3. The heart. Grief that lives in the chest. Some burdens are not carried in the hands or shoulders, but in the quiet, rhythmic beating of the chest, where the heart remembers everything, even the things we try to forget. Frank, an 82-year-old veteran, spent most of his life in silence about the things that mattered most. He had a strong voice, a firm handshake, and a reputation for being tough. But over the past few years, his health had begun to falter. He found himself waking in the middle of the night, not with panic, but with an inexplicable tightness in his chest, as if something was pressing from the inside out. His doctor checked his heart, structurally sound, no heart disease, just tension. But Frank didn't need a diagnosis. He knew exactly what was sitting there. It was the memory of his wife's last words, spoken softly through the oxygen mask, asking if he forgave her. It was the guilt of not replying, of turning away, of letting fear and pride build a wall between them in her final days. The heart is not merely a pump. It is, in Buddhist thought, the seat of compassion, connection, and emotional memory. When the heart chakra is closed or constricted, the body may respond with shallow breathing, palpitations, tightness, and fatigue. But underneath the physical symptoms, the spiritual wound is often deeper. Unresolved grief, betrayal, emotional abandonment, or the long-term effects of loving without reciprocity, or never allowing oneself to truly love at all. The Buddha understood the suffering of the human heart intimately. He taught, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." And the same can be said of grief. When we suppress it, it does not go away. It embeds itself in our breath, in our chest, in our way of showing up to life. For Frank, healing didn't begin in a hospital or therapy room. It started with a photo, an old image of him and his wife in their younger days. He placed it by his bedside. Each morning, he whispered a few simple words. "I'm sorry. I still love you." He cried often, but gently, as if each tear was loosening the knot that had formed behind his sternum. He began volunteering at a local hospice, sitting beside others who, like him, had waited too long to say the words that matter. In Buddhist practice, healing the heart requires vulnerability, a willingness to feel the pain, not deny it. It also asks us to cultivate metta, loving kindness, not just toward others, but toward ourselves. Thish, nasht, and shnasht reminds us to love without knowing how to love wounds the person we love. But even if we've wounded, even if we've walked away, it's never too late to return. Not always with words, but with presence, with breath, with the gentle act of forgiving the past and allowing the heart to soften again. So if you feel a heaviness in your chest that no medication seems to lift, ask yourself gently, what grief am I still carrying? What truth needs to be honored, forgiven, or finally felt? Because the heart doesn't seek perfection, it seeks connection. And healing begins, not when we escape grief, but when we allow it to move, through breath, through kindness, through presence, until the pain becomes peace. 4. The stomach, digesting more than food. There's an old saying, it's not what you eat that gives you indigestion, it's what you can't stomach. For Susan, a 66-year-old grandmother from Wisconsin that couldn't have rung truer, she lived a relatively healthy lifestyle, watched her diet, drank warm tea after meals, avoided anything too spicy. Yet she still suffered from relentless bloating, acid reflux, and a sense that her stomach was always on edge, no matter how carefully she ate. But it wasn't just the food. Susan's life, especially in the last decade, had been filled with unresolved tension, a falling out with her brother after their parents' death, years of caregiving for her husband who passed from Alzheimer's, and the unspoken grief of putting everyone else's needs before her own. She often said, "I feel like I've been swallowing life whole without ever having the time to chew." In Buddhist thought, the stomach is intimately tied to how we process experience, not just physically, but emotionally and energetically. It is the seat of the solar plexus, the chakra related to personal power, fear, and control. When the mind is constantly anxious or trying to control outcomes, the body reacts. It tightens, it resists, it inflames. Many people experience digestive issues not because of what they ate, but because of what they're trying so hard not to feel. Fear of change, shame about the past, or simply the unprocessed chaos of a life lived always in service of others. The Buddha spoke clearly about this. Nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded, and what we suppress emotionally often gets rerouted into the gut. We say we have gut feelings for a reason. The stomach is not just a digestive organ, it is a second brain, a deep intuitive space that processes not only nutrients but truth. And when we avoid our truth, when we pretend everything is fine, when we say yes while meaning no, the stomach absorbs the tension, silently trying to protect us by holding it all in. Susan's healing began with one unexpected shift. She started writing, not novels or essays, but honest, vulnerable letters to herself. Letters titled, "What I've Never Said," and "What I'm Still Afraid Of." She cried through most of them, but the writing didn't just ease her mind, it eased her digestion. Her symptoms softened, her appetite returned, not just for food, but for life. She also began practicing mindful eating. Before each meal, she paused, held her hands over her stomach and whispered, "Thank you for holding so much." She chewed slowly, breathed deeply, and treated each bite as a blessing, not just fuel. Buddhism teaches that simplicity, awareness, and acceptance are forms of liberation. When we stop trying to digest the world all at once, we find clarity. Thich Nhat often reminded his students, "Drink your tea slowly and reverently, as if it is the axis on which the world Earth revolves, slowly, evenly, without rushing toward the future." So if your stomach feels heavy, tight, or reactive, pause. Ask yourself, what am I holding in? What fear have I yet to release? What emotion needs to move through me, not around me? Because digestion is more than physical. It is the art of receiving life, feeling it fully, and letting it pass through with grace. And healing sometimes is as simple as giving yourself permission to feel and breathe. 5. The liver, fire that burns from within. Anger is one of those emotions that rarely travels alone. It brings with it bitterness, resentment, blame, and if left unchecked, it burns, not just in the mind, but in the body. Raymond, a 70-year-old retired mechanic from Texas, used to have what folks called a temper. He never saw it that way. He said he just spoke the truth and didn't take nonsense. But beneath his short fuse was a lifetime of unhealed wounds, a father who never approved of him, a marriage that ended with doors slamming, and friendships lost to pride. He'd mellowed with age, or so he thought. But in recent years, he'd begun experiencing intense discomfort beneath his ribs, chronic fatigue, and bouts of irritability that came out of nowhere. Medical tests revealed liver inflammation, though he rarely drank alcohol. The doctors gave him medications, but nothing seemed to truly ease the fire inside. In Buddhist thought, the liver is more than a filter for toxins. It's an energetic seat of anger, frustration, and suppressed emotional fire. When we cling to the past, when we replay old arguments, or silently stew over how others have wronged us, the liver bears the brunt. The Buddha once said, "Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." And Raymond, for all his effort to stay calm, still carried those coals. He would relive old arguments in his mind, what he should have said, how unfair it was, how no one ever apologized to him. The fire had dimmed, but it hadn't gone out. Spiritual traditions across Asia have long understood liver imbalance as not merely a physical condition, but a signal, a sign that the inner flame has not been honored or tamed. This doesn't mean we should suppress anger. Suppression only drives it deeper. The key is transformation, from rage to understanding, from reaction to release. Raymond's path to healing began, oddly enough, with humming. He joined a Tai Chi class where the instructor guided them through slow movements, combined with gentle vocal vibrations. He resisted at first, but gradually, as he learned to exhale with intention, to sigh without shame, something inside softened. He also began a daily forgiveness practice. Each morning, he whispered the names of those he had once cursed, and with his hand over his liver, he simply said, "I release you, I release me." The first few weeks, it felt fake. Then, it didn't. He described it like unclogging a drain, slowly, patiently, letting the stagnant pain begin to flow. Thit, Nuntit, Husna teaches, when another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself. He does not need punishment. He needs help. And when we understand that, truly deeply, the fire dims. Not because we forget, but because we forgive. Not for them, but for our own peace. So if you feel a heat that rises too easily, if your body seems to protest with restlessness, tension, or persistent inflammation, pause. Ask yourself, what anger have I held on to so long that it has become part of me? Who am I still waiting to blame, or punish, or outlast? Because the liver cannot release what the heart refuses to let go. And healing, in the Buddhist path, is not about becoming emotionless. It's about transmuting fire into light. 6. The kidneys, fear and the unknown. There's a quiet kind of fear that doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't send you running or screaming. Instead, it lingers in your breath, hides behind polite smiles, and curls up at the base of your spine like a sleeping animal, always alert, always ready. And sometimes it takes up residence in the body in the form of kidney tension, adrenal fatigue, or that constant sense of unease that no one else seems to see. Linda, a 74-year-old widow from Northern California, had been through more than most. She lost her husband unexpectedly at 60. 2 years later, her sister passed. She had to sell her house, move into a small apartment, and for the first time in her life, learn how to live alone. People around her called her strong, but Linda never felt strong. She felt scared. Every night, she'd lie in bed and listen to the sounds of the world outside, the wind brushing against the window, the faint hum of traffic in the distance, the throb of her own heartbeat in her ears, and the fear would come. Not panic, not anxiety exactly, just a quiet, relentless fear of something, of illness, of loneliness, of running out of money, of the future. Over time, her body started to echo that fear. Her lower back ached. She felt weak in her legs. Her doctor noted her kidney function was slightly off. Nothing urgent, but enough to cause fatigue and imbalance. Linda tried more sleep, more water, even gentle yoga, but the fear remained. In Buddhist thought, the kidneys are associated with the energy of fear, survival, and life force regulation. They are connected to the element of water, fluid, deep, and sensitive to disruption. When we experience long-term fear, especially fear of the unknown, the kidney energy can become depleted. This isn't superstition. Even in modern science, we now know the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, regulate the body's stress response. Too much fear for too long, and the whole system becomes overworked, overwhelmed, worn down. The Buddha did not ignore fear. He named it, sat with it, and saw through it. He once said, "There is no fear for one whose mind is not filled with desires." Fear often arises from our inability to trust the unfolding of life, from the deep need to control what cannot be controlled. And in our later years, that fear often takes root in the unknown. What will happen to me? Will I be alone? What if something goes wrong? But Buddhist wisdom teaches that true freedom comes not from certainty, but from presence, from learning to sit with fear as if it were a guest, not to fight it, not to feed it, but to bow to it, to say, "I see you, and I choose peace anyway." Linda's journey toward healing was not dramatic. It was quietly revolutionary. She began lighting a candle each night before bed, saying out loud one thing she could trust. "I trust this breath. I trust this moment. I trust that I am not alone." She also placed her hands gently over her lower back each morning and whispered, "I am safe. I am still here." These simple acts began to restore something deeper than kidney energy. They restored her faith in life. In the teachings of mindfulness, fear dissolves in the presence of awareness. When we breathe into the unknown, when we stay grounded in the now, the imagined storms begin to settle. The future shrinks, the present expands, and our body, especially the kidneys, begins to relax, to let go. So if you find yourself clenching against what might happen, holding back from joy because of what could go wrong, pause, feel your feet on the ground, feel your breath return, and know this: the unknown is not your enemy. It's simply the part of life that has not yet arrived. Let go, let it come, and trust that whatever comes, you will meet it with the strength you didn't even know you had. 7. Reproductive organs. Karma of creativity and love. There are certain parts of the body we're taught not to speak of, parts wrapped in silence, embarrassment, or old shame. Yet these are often the very places where our deepest karmic stories lie hidden, in the space of intimacy, of creation, of connection, and sometimes of quiet pain. Miriam, 69, was a painter in her youth. She used to describe herself as wildly alive, someone who once traveled through Europe alone, who danced barefoot in fields, who loved fiercely. But decades of marriage, raising children and surviving betrayal changed something in her. By the time she reached her late 60s, her art supplies had been packed away, and her body, particularly her pelvic area, began to speak in discomfort, recurring infections, persistent tightness, a dull ache that seemed to have no clear cause. Her doctor, kind but clinical, prescribed creams and tests, but none of it touched the grief that Miriam had long buried, not just from the infidelity she had forgiven, but never fully healed from, but from the creative self she had slowly abandoned for the sake of being someone else's partner, someone else's mother. In Buddhist philosophy, the reproductive organs are more than biological. They are deeply symbolic, linked to our creative life force, our sexual energy, and our karmic patterns around desire, connection, and power. When imbalances arise in this area, whether through pain, numbness, or emotional distress, it may reflect the karmic echoes of past misuses of intimacy, coercion, manipulation, suppression, or abandonment. But it may also stem from something quieter, a life in which one's creative fire was dimmed too soon or never allowed to burn at all. The Buddha taught that desire, when left unconscious, can become a source of suffering. But when awakened through awareness, it can be transformed into wisdom, connection, and art. Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. Miriam's healing began not with medicine, but with memory. One day she opened the old trunk at the back of her closet and found her paintbrushes, dry, dusty, still stained with color. And something stirred. She set up a small table by the window and painted, quietly, alone, not for anyone else, not for display, but for herself, for the girl who once believed beauty could be born from a blank canvas. She also began attending women's circles where silence was broken, where stories of heartache, lost intimacy, aging bodies, and rediscovered joy were shared like sacred scripture. She cried when she spoke, not because she was ashamed, but because for the first time she didn't feel alone in her silence. Buddhism reminds us that healing is not always about fixing. Sometimes it is about reclaiming our relationship with our body, not as something broken, but as something sacred. Reclaiming the energy of love, not just romantic love, but the deeper love of aliveness, of creativity, of presence. Reclaiming the right to feel pleasure, to make art, to start again. So if you feel disconnected from that part of yourself, if intimacy feels painful, if your creativity feels frozen, ask not just what is wrong, but what has been lost, and more importantly, what part of me is ready to return. Because whether you are 30 or 70, the body still longs to create, to connect, to express. And when you honor that longing, not with shame, but with reverence, you don't just heal your body, you awaken your soul. 8. The spine. The weight we don't need to carry. There's something about back pain that feels different from other kinds of pain. It doesn't just hurt, it burdens. It tugs at you in silence, reminding you with every step, every twist, that something is too heavy, too much, too long held. Walter, a 76-year-old former caregiver, had carried people his entire life. First, his ailing mother in his 20s, then his wife, through her cancer diagnosis, and eventually his grandson, when his daughter struggled with addiction. He was the dependable one, the strong one, the one who never asked for help. But by the time he reached his 70s, his back had begun to fold inward. He walked slower, sat gingerly, and every morning it took him longer to stand up straight, as though life itself had become heavier with each passing year. Doctors told him it was spinal degeneration, something that comes with age. But Walter suspected it was more than that. He once said, quietly, "It's like I'm carrying stories that were never mine to carry, but I did anyway." In Buddhist understanding, the spine represents the central channel of spiritual energy, the Sushumna Nadi. It is where the life force flows freely when we are aligned in purpose and truth. But when we carry burdens that do not belong to us, emotional weight, unresolved guilt, generational pain, that channel constricts. The posture shifts, the breath shortens, the soul tires. There is a karmic lesson buried in chronic back pain, especially in those who have lived lives centered on duty, sacrifice, or silent suffering. We are taught that to give is noble, and it is. But Buddhism teaches balance. You yourself, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The Buddha. Walter had given love outwardly, endlessly, but inwardly, he had abandoned himself. He had never learned to say no without guilt, never allowed himself rest without shame, never thought of asking the simple question, "And what about me?" Healing for him began not with surgery or medication, but with a shift in belief. He started to meditate, sitting against a wall with a cushion, just 5 minutes at first. Each time, he visualized placing one burden down, a memory, a responsibility, a should. He would breathe out and whisper, "Not mine to carry anymore." He also learned to ask for help, not as a weakness, but as an act of sacred humility. A neighbor began helping him with groceries. His grandson, now older, started showing up just to sit and talk. And slowly, the spine of his spirit began to unbend. Buddhist practice invites us to look inward and ask, where am I carrying more than I was ever meant to? Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's ancestral, sometimes it's the weight of everyone else's happiness. But the truth is, you are allowed to set it down, not because you don't care, but because you matter too. The spine, like life, is designed to support, not to collapse. So if your back aches not just with age but with memory, pause, breathe deeply, and ask yourself, what can I let go of today so I can stand a little taller tomorrow? Because some burdens aren't yours, and freedom begins when you finally lovingly let them fall. 9. The legs and feet, fear of moving forward. Some fears don't roar, they linger in the soles of our feet, in the way we hesitate before taking a step, in the way we slow down not just from age, but from something deeper, a quiet resistance to moving forward. Charles, 78, used to be a long-distance walker, not for sport, but for peace. After his wife passed 10 years ago, walking was how he cleared his mind, how he coped with loss, how he moved through grief. But something changed. Also, over the past year, his legs had started feeling heavy, not just tired, but reluctant. Each walk felt shorter, each step more uncertain. At first he chalked it up to arthritis, but the scans were inconclusive. His doctors said, it's just part of getting older. But Charles wasn't sure. He told a friend over coffee one morning, it's like my legs know I'm carrying something I don't want to face, like they're trying to hold me back. And perhaps in some way, they were. In Buddhist thought, the legs and feet are not just physical limbs, they represent movement, progress, direction. When they grow weak without cause, or pain arises without explanation, it can reflect karmic stagnation, a fear of change, a reluctance to face the unknown, or guilt about steps once taken long ago. The Buddha taught, it is better to travel well than to arrive. But what if the fear is not about where we're going, but about what we've left behind? Charles carried regrets, words unsaid to his children, opportunities missed, years he spent on work instead of wonder. His legs, he later realized, weren't failing him. They were slowing him down long enough to ask, are you walking with intention or just running from your past? We often think fear lives in the heart or mind, but for many, it settles quietly in the feet, making us stumble when we're uncertain, swell when we're overwhelmed, or ache when we stand too long on the edge of change. Healing began for Charles the day he walked barefoot in his backyard, something he hadn't done since childhood. He felt the soil, the unevenness, the coolness of the earth, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't walking to escape or for exercise. He was walking with the present moment. He began practicing walking meditation, as taught by Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, walk as if you are kissing the earth with your feet. Each step became an act of presence, each movement a prayer. He stopped measuring distance and started measuring awareness, and slowly the fear eased. Not because it disappeared, but because he was no longer running from it. If your legs feel tired without reason, or your feet ache even when you rest, ask yourself gently, what am I afraid to move toward? Or what have I been trying to walk away from for too long? Because sometimes the body doesn't want you to rush forward. Sometimes it asks you to pause, to feel the earth beneath you, and to remember that moving forward doesn't always mean going fast. It means going fully. So take your next step slowly. Let it be sacred, and let it be yours. 10. The skin. When shame shows up outside, the skin is often called the body's largest organ, but it is also its most visible boundary, the first thing the world sees, and sometimes the first place our pain makes itself known. It blushes with embarrassment, breaks out under stress, tightens with anxiety, and flares up when emotions we've tried to hide have nowhere else to go. Joanne, 72, had never struggled with skin problems in her youth, but in recent years, eczema had become a constant companion. Red patches along her arms, dry and irritated, sometimes painfully raw. She tried everything: ointments, antihistamines, diet changes. Some helped a little. Nothing cured it. But the flare-ups always followed the same pattern. After difficult conversations, family gatherings she didn't feel welcome in, or days when memories of past mistakes returned uninvited. One day, after her skin worsened following an argument with her daughter, she said softly, "It's like my shame has nowhere to go, so it comes through my skin." And that, perhaps, wasn't far from the truth. In Buddhist philosophy, the skin reflects the boundary between the self and the world, the space where identity, vulnerability, and belonging meet. When the skin becomes inflamed without medical explanation, it can be a somatic echo of guilt, shame, or the fear of judgment, often rooted in karmic wounds that have not been brought into the light of compassion. You see, many of us, especially in the later seasons of life, carry regrets that we believe we must carry alone, moments we cannot undo, words we wish we could take back, and so, instead of speaking them, we wear them. The Buddha once said, "To understand everything is to forgive everything." But before we can forgive others, or even ask for forgiveness, we must first learn to forgive ourselves, not from pride, but from compassion. Joanne's journey of healing began not with dermatology, but with a mirror. Each morning, instead of rushing to cover her skin with cream and sleeves, she stood in front of her reflection and whispered, "You are not a failure, you are healing." At first, she couldn't look herself in the eye, But with time, her gaze softened. She began rubbing oil into her skin slowly, not out of desperation, but as a daily act of reverence, a sacred ritual of acceptance. She also began writing letters to her younger self, to the daughter she struggled to reach, and to the parts of her that had long felt unloved. And slowly the inflammation eased, not entirely, but enough to breathe. Enough to remind her that she was no longer hiding. In Buddhist mindfulness, we are taught to observe without judgment, even the uncomfortable, even the ugly. Look at yourself with the eyes of compassion, says Thich Nhat. You are not only your mistakes. So if your skin is calling attention to itself through itching, burning, rashes or redness, ask not just what irritated it, but what part of me is still waiting to be seen with kindness. Because shame grows in silence, but it begins to dissolve when it is bathed in acceptance. And your skin, like your soul, is not asking to be perfect. It is asking to be loved. 11. The eyes. Seeing through illusion, there is a unique kind of tiredness that doesn't come from a lack of sleep. It settles behind the eyes, a weight, a dullness, a quiet blur that doesn't quite go away, even when you close them. It's the fatigue of seeing too much, and perhaps seeing too little of what truly matters. Helen, 81, had been struggling with her vision for years, not blindness, just a gradual dimming. Reading became harder. Faces were more difficult to recognize from afar. She often joked, "The world's gotten fuzzier," or maybe I've just stopped looking at it properly. But there was a truth hidden in her jest, because as she sat alone in her home, surrounded by the photos of people she no longer saw often, Helen confessed that what truly hurt wasn't the blurriness of the world. It was the way she'd gone through life only seeing what she wanted to see, and missing so much of what had been trying to reach her. She'd clung for decades to a certain narrative, that her choices had been right, that her silence had protected her family, that her pain wasn't worth troubling others with. And now, at the edge of old age, she realized her sight had narrowed long before her vision did. In Buddhist thought, the eyes represent perception, both literal and spiritual. When our eyes grow weary, when vision becomes distorted or strained without clear cause, it may point to a karmic invitation to see more deeply, not the surface of life, but the essence of it, not the behavior of others, but the truth within ourselves. As the Buddha said, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. The illusions we carry about who we are, about how others have wronged us, about what should have been, create layers between us and reality. And those illusions over time weigh heavily on the eyes. We begin to lose not only physical clarity, but spiritual sight. Helen's path to healing wasn't about restoring her vision. It was about expanding her seeing. One morning, during her meditation group's silent sitting, the instructor invited them to practice soft seeing, not staring or focusing, but simply allowing the eyes to rest while the awareness opened, and something shifted. Helen said she began to see differently, not with sharpness but with softness. She saw the lines in a friend's face as poetry, not wrinkles. She saw her own hands, aged and veined, not as withered but as wise. She realized her sight had always been clear, but her judgment had clouded it. She started writing letters again, calling old friends. She began reading poetry aloud, even if she had to squint. And slowly, the heaviness in her eyes faded, not cured, but clarified. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that clear seeing is the foundation of liberation, not just seeing the world clearly, but seeing ourselves clearly, with compassion, with honesty, without illusion. With our thoughts we make the world, The Buddha said, to see the world as it is, we must first quiet the mind. So if your eyes ache, if they blur even in good light, ask, what am I avoiding? What truth have I refused to see? Not out there, but in here. And when the answer arises, however gently, however slowly, don't look away. Because clarity isn't always about sharper vision. Sometimes it's about finally opening the eyes of the heart. Conclusion. Your body is not broken, it's speaking. And so, as we arrive at the end of this journey, let us pause and take a breath. Not just in the lungs, but in the soul. What have we seen? That the body is not just a machine of flesh and bone, but a mirror of karma, a living manuscript of our joys, our wounds, our forgotten truths. Each part, the head, the throat, the heart, the stomach, the liver, the kidneys, the spine, the skin, the eyes, carries not just physical symptoms but emotional echoes. Fear, anger, guilt, grief, regret, shame, stagnation. They don't simply pass through us, they settle, they speak, and often they wait for our attention, our kindness, our willingness to truly listen. Perhaps your back has been hurting not from age, but from carrying burdens that were never yours. Perhaps your legs feel weak, not because of frailty, but because you've been standing still, afraid to take a step forward. Perhaps your eyes blur not from time, but from holding on to illusions you've outgrown. Your pain is not random. Your discomfort is not meaningless. It is the language of your body calling your spirit home. The Buddha taught that to heal the body without healing the mind is to only heal halfway. But what he also showed us, through silence, through mindfulness, through compassion, is that true healing begins when we stop running, stop suppressing, and simply return to ourselves with gentle attention. So let this be your invitation, not just to treat symptoms, but to touch the root, to place a hand where it hurts and ask, what part of me is still waiting to be heard? To look inward not with judgment, but with the soft eyes of forgiveness. You are not broken, you are becoming whole. And remember, it is never too late. Not at 60, not at 70, not at 80, to breathe deeply, to forgive softly, to love your body, not because it is perfect, but because it is yours, and it has carried you all this way. If this message touched something in you, even gently, we invite you to join us here on Quiet Wisdom. This is a place for reflection, healing, and the kind of peace that grows slowly, like light at dawn. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a comment below. Which part of your body has been speaking to you lately, and what might it be trying to say? And don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss another moment of stillness, truth, and quiet awakening. Until we meet again, walk gently, breathe deeply, and trust that the healing has already begun. Namaste.